The school stood tall behind iron gates, shining every morning like it belonged to another world. The building was old but carefully kept, with clean white walls, wide glass windows, and floors that reflected light like mirrors. Expensive cars lined up outside every morning, dropping off children in neat uniforms. Their bags were heavy, not just with books, but with confidence. This school was known for success, and everyone inside acted like they deserved to be there. Before the first bell rang, while students were still asleep in warm beds, a man was already inside the building. He pushed a cleaning cart slowly down the hallway, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. He worked quietly, wiping desks, emptying trash bins, and making sure every classroom looked perfect. Most people did not know his name. To them, he was just the janitor, part of the background, like the walls or the lights. Some mornings, a small boy followed him into the school. The boy stayed close, carrying a worn backpack that had seen better days. He was not a student there. He did not wear the same uniform. His shoes were clean but old, and his clothes were simple. He never ran in the hallways or made noise. He sat quietly on a bench near the storage room, waiting for his father to finish work before school hours began. The boy liked the school, even though it was not meant for him. He liked the smell of fresh floors and books. He liked how the morning light passed through the tall windows. But most of all, he liked the sounds. Every day, different sounds filled the building. Shoes tapping, lockers closing, voices laughing. Yet one sound stood out above all others. It came from the far end of the hallway, behind a heavy door that was often left slightly open. It was the sound of a piano. The music room was large and quiet, with rows of chairs and a stage at the front. On the stage sat a grand piano, black and shining, like it was alive. Students from wealthy families took music lessons there. They learned notes, rhythm, and timing. Many of them had grown up with instruments in their homes. For them, music was normal, expected, almost routine. The boy had never touched a piano before. There was no piano in his home. There was barely space for a table. But he listened. Every day when he heard the piano, he stopped whatever he was doing. He closed his eyes and focused. His fingers moved slightly in the air, pressing invisible keys. He did not know the names of the notes, but he remembered the sounds. He remembered the patterns. The music stayed in his head long after the sound faded. The janitor noticed this. Sometimes, while mopping nearby, he saw his son standing still, listening. He did not interrupt him. He did not ask questions. Life had taught him that some dreams were fragile. If spoken out loud too early, they could break. So he let the boy listen in silence. As the school day began, students filled the hallways. Some walked confidently, talking about holidays, new phones, and private lessons. Others laughed loudly, their voices echoing. When they passed the janitor and his son, most did not look at them. A few did, some with curiosity, some with quiet judgment. The boy felt those looks, but he kept his eyes down. He had learned early that being quiet made things easier. He knew he did not belong there. He knew the school was expensive. He had heard adults talk about fees that sounded like impossible numbers. Still, he felt something pulling him toward the place, especially toward the music room. After the bell rang, the janitor guided his son to a small corner near the back hall. "Stay here," he said gently. "I'll be nearby." The boy nodded. He always did. He took out a notebook, not filled with homework, but with messy lines and shapes. They were not drawings. They were his way of remembering music. Each line stood for a sound, each mark for a pause. It was his own secret language. As hours passed, the school moved on without noticing him. Teachers taught. Students learned. The janitor cleaned. And the boy listened. Sometimes the piano played fast and cheerful. Other times it played slow and heavy, like someone telling a sad story without words. Every sound stayed with him. During lunch break, students gathered in groups. They sat together, eating food brought from home or bought from the cafeteria. Laughter filled the air. The boy watched from a distance, holding a simple sandwich wrapped in paper. He ate slowly, not because he was not hungry, but because he did not want to draw attention. A few students noticed him then. They whispered. Some pointed. He heard pieces of their words but pretended not to. He had heard worse before. He reminded himself that he was only there to wait for his father. Nothing more. Later in the afternoon, the music room door opened wider than usual. A teacher stepped out, talking loudly about practice schedules and an upcoming school event. The boy could see the piano clearly now. For a moment, the room was empty, silent. His heart beat faster. He took a small step forward, then stopped. He knew better. He stayed where he was. The janitor watched all of this from afar. He had worked many jobs in his life. He knew how people judged without speaking. He knew how invisible he had become to most of them. But when he looked at his son, he saw something different. He saw focus. He saw patience. He saw a quiet strength that life had not yet taken away. As the school day came to an end, students left the building in groups. Cars waited outside again. Laughter followed them out. Slowly, the halls became empty. The piano was silent now. The boy closed his notebook and stood up. The janitor finished his last task and called his son. They walked out together, passing the same gates that had welcomed others so warmly that morning. The boy looked back once, toward the tall windows and the place where the piano rested. He did not know it yet, but this school, which treated him like a shadow, would soon hear his voice in a way no one expected. The next day, the school was full of the same sounds as before. Students ran down the hallways, laughing and talking. Some were excited about sports, others about art projects. The janitor walked his usual route, pushing the cart slowly, but his eyes often fell on the small figure who followed him quietly. The boy stayed close, carrying the notebook he had made for himself, filled with marks that no one could read except him. He wanted to remember every sound he heard the day before. In the music room, the piano waited silently. During the morning practice, the students worked on a piece for the upcoming recital. Their fingers danced on the keys, producing sound after sound. The boy paused near the doorway, not daring to step inside. He listened to each note, feeling the rhythm in his chest. It was as if the music spoke directly to him, telling a story he had always wanted to understand. He tried to hum along quietly, imagining his own hands moving on the keys. Some students noticed him peeking in. One of them, a boy with a sharp uniform and a shiny bag, whispered loudly to his friend. The words cut through the air like a small knife. "You are too poor for this school," he said, laughing under his breath. Others nearby snickered. The boy froze, holding his breath. He had heard insults before, but never in front of so many people. His face burned, and for a moment he felt small, like he did not belong anywhere. The janitor saw what happened. He did not scold the other students. He had seen this kind of cruelty before in small ways and large. Instead, he looked at his son, who had already lowered his head, pretending nothing had happened. The janitor put a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and said quietly, "Don't listen to them. Keep your heart on the music." The boy nodded, but it was hard to feel brave. The words repeated themselves in his mind, echoing louder than the piano itself. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the voice inside told him silence was safer. Instead, he turned his attention back to the music, letting it wash over him. He listened closely to the way the fingers moved, the way the notes rose and fell. He memorized each sound, each pause, and the way the piano seemed to breathe. During lunch, the boy sat in his usual corner, away from everyone else. He unwrapped a simple sandwich his father had made, watching the students play and laugh. Some glanced at him, some whispered. He felt the sting of isolation but tried to ignore it. The notebook lay open beside him, and he made marks to remember the music he had heard that morning. Even though he could not play yet, he was learning in his own way, building a connection with the piano inside his mind. Later in the day, the janitor and his son cleaned the auditorium, where the recital would be held. The boy moved slowly, pretending to help sweep the floor, but his eyes were always on the piano. It seemed even larger and more beautiful than before. He imagined the sound of his own fingers moving over the keys, creating music that could touch hearts. He closed his eyes for a moment and let his imagination take over. For a few minutes, the music room belonged to him. As the day went on, whispers and stares followed him. Some students were curious about the boy who always waited in the hallways. Others mocked him quietly, pointing out his worn clothes and simple shoes. The words from yesterday still lingered, but he learned to block them out, focusing instead on the sounds he loved. He practiced in silence, pressing his fingers on the desk as if it were a piano, moving to the rhythm he heard inside. The janitor watched this quietly. He remembered his own childhood, when he had been judged for having nothing. He knew the boy's pain, but he also knew his strength. He had taught his son to observe, to listen, and to be patient. He believed that talent and dedication could overcome the cruel words of others. He reminded his son gently, "One day, they will hear you, and they will have no choice but to listen." That evening, the school was nearly empty. The boy lingered near the music room, waiting for a chance to hear the piano one last time. The teacher who practiced the students' recital came out briefly to check the instrument. The boy stepped back quickly, but the teacher noticed him. She smiled kindly and said, "Do you like the piano?" The boy nodded shyly, gripping his notebook. He did not answer with words. The teacher continued, "It's wonderful to listen, but sometimes, it's even more wonderful to try. One day you should sit at it." The boy felt a spark in his chest. He wanted to, but he also remembered the harsh words from before. What if he failed? What if everyone laughed? He looked down at his notebook, then back at the piano. The black, shiny surface reflected the light from the windows, almost inviting him. He felt a mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time, he imagined himself playing in front of others. His father came to get him, and together they walked home. The boy could not stop thinking about the piano. That night, he drew more marks in his notebook, remembering each note he had heard. He tried to hum the music quietly in his room, moving his fingers on the table as if the keys were there. Sleep came late, and dreams were filled with sounds, rhythms, and imagined applause. The next morning, he returned to the school more determined. He understood that some students would judge him, some teachers might overlook him, but he had something no one could take away: the music that lived in his heart. He listened carefully, he memorized, and he practiced silently. Every note was a step forward, every pause a chance to grow. Days passed, and the whispers continued, but the boy did not falter. He had learned to ignore insults and focus on what mattered. The janitor watched him with pride, seeing patience and dedication in the small figure who could have been invisible to the world. The music room, once a distant dream, now felt closer, almost like a secret waiting to be discovered. One afternoon, a student accidentally left the door open wider than usual. The boy peeked inside, seeing the piano clearly, bathed in sunlight. His heart raced. He stepped closer, but not too close. He imagined his hands on the keys, producing the sounds that had filled his mind for so many days. The room seemed to whisper back to him, encouraging him to keep trying, to keep listening, to keep believing. The words "too poor for this school" still lingered in his mind, but they were no longer stronger than his love for the music. He realized that poverty did not define him. The way he listened, the way he remembered, the way he imagined. These things were his own, and no one could take them away. For the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, the world would have to notice him for what he could do, not what he did not have. The janitor called him, and they left together, walking past the empty hallways. The boy took one last look at the music room, and a small smile appeared. He did not know how or when, but he knew he would sit at that piano one day. The path was not easy, and the words of judgment would not disappear immediately. But he had a dream, and he had a plan, and that was more powerful than any insult. That evening, he practiced again at home, using his fingers to play invisible keys on the table. He remembered the patterns, the sounds, the pauses, and the emotions. He practiced until his hands ached and his mind was full of music. He was not just a boy waiting in the hallway. He was a boy preparing for a moment that no one could take away. And that moment, though far off, would change everything. One afternoon, Just a week after the insult that had shaken him, something unexpected happened. The music teacher had been preparing the students for the upcoming recital, checking who would play which pieces and making sure everyone knew their parts. One of the main pianists had suddenly fallen ill and could not perform. Panic swept through the music room. The teacher did not have enough time to train a replacement. Students whispered nervously to one another, worried that the recital might be ruined. The janitor's son was quietly moving the chairs nearby, pretending to help with the rehearsal. He had been watching, listening, memorizing. The music room was familiar to him now, every corner, every note, every pause. Without thinking, he stepped closer to the piano. His small hand brushed against the shiny surface. The teacher looked up and froze. A few students noticed and started whispering. Some laughed quietly, thinking he was just curious. Others frowned, unsure what to make of it. "Do you want to try?" the teacher asked, more out of surprise than hope. Her eyes studied him carefully. He nodded silently. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the school outside. The boy approached the piano slowly, almost in disbelief that he was allowed to touch it. He sat down on the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys. He remembered all the music he had heard in the hallways, all the patterns he had memorized. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he began to play. At first, the notes were small, almost hesitant. But soon, they grew in confidence, flowing smoothly and beautifully, as if the piano had been waiting for him all along. The room was filled with the sound, rich and warm, more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The students were stunned. They had expected a small, timid performance, maybe even mistakes, but what they heard was beyond anything they had ever experienced. The teacher stopped pacing and leaned in, listening carefully. The music filled the space, telling a story without words. It spoke of patience, of longing, of dreams that refused to be silenced. Some students held their breath, unable to move. A few tried to whisper to each other, but the music was louder than their words. They watched as the boy's fingers moved with precision and emotion. He did not need sheet music. He did not need lessons from the teacher at that moment. He only needed the music he had stored in his mind, the rhythm he had memorized, the emotion he had felt each day he listened. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a teacher clapped, quietly at first, then louder. One by one, the other teachers and students began to clap, some with tears in their eyes. The boy's cheeks burned. He had never played in front of so many people, and he had never expected such a reaction. He stood up, unsure what to do next. The teacher smiled at him, eyes wide with admiration. "You have an incredible gift," she said softly. "How did you learn to play like that?" The boy looked down at his notebook. He opened it and showed the teacher the lines and marks, the secret language he had invented to remember music. She studied it carefully, then looked back at him, amazed. "You taught yourself?" she whispered. He nodded. He had never had a piano at home. He had learned by listening, by memorizing, by imagining the music in his mind and practicing invisible keys on the table. His father had supported him quietly, never pushing, only guiding. The janitor had always said, "Listen, learn, and be patient. One day the world will notice." The news spread quickly through the school. Students who had laughed at him the day he was insulted now looked at him with a mix of awe and guilt. The words "too poor for this school" seemed meaningless in that moment. His talent, his dedication, and his perseverance had spoken louder than any insult could. The teacher arranged a special lesson for him, introducing him to sheet music and new techniques. He learned quickly, absorbing each instruction with focus and excitement. The janitor watched from a distance, quietly proud. He had known his son was special, but he had never imagined the school would see it so clearly. The boy practiced every day, sometimes in the hallways before the school opened, sometimes at home on the table, pressing invisible keys, and sometimes in the music room when no one else was around. He no longer felt invisible. He had a purpose, a voice, and a way to express it. Each day, the piano felt more like an extension of himself, and each note he played carried a piece of his heart. When the recital arrived, the boy was nervous. He had never performed in front of a large audience, and he feared making a mistake. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and families. The janitor sat in the back, watching quietly, hands clasped tightly, hoping his son would shine. When it was his turn, the boy stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was bright, and the audience was silent. He took a deep breath, sat down at the piano, and began to play. Every note was clear, every chord perfect. The music flowed like a river, carrying the emotions of weeks spent listening, practicing, and dreaming. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward in their seats, some with tears streaming down their faces. After the final note, the hall erupted in applause. The boy stood, hands trembling, and bowed. The janitor rushed to the stage, lifting his son into a proud embrace. The students who had mocked him before looked on, realizing that talent and heart could not be measured by wealth or status. From that day on, the boy's life at the school changed. He was no longer just the janitor's son who lingered in the hallways. He was a talented musician, respected and admired. He continued to practice, to learn, and to grow, never forgetting the long hours of listening and imagining that had brought him to this moment. The words of ridicule that had once cut so deeply now seemed distant. The boy understood that poverty did not define him, and that talent, dedication, and courage could open doors that others believed were closed. His journey was far from over, but he had proven to himself and to the world that he belonged, not because of money or privilege, but because of his heart and his music. After the recital, the boy's life at the school changed in ways he had never imagined. The students who had once whispered and laughed now stared in quiet amazement when they saw him. Teachers nodded to him in the hallways, offering smiles and words of encouragement. The janitor watched with pride, though he remained humble, knowing that it was his son's talent, not their attention, that mattered most. The music teacher began giving him special lessons, helping him read sheet music and understand rhythm in new ways. Each session was filled with discovery. The boy absorbed everything eagerly, his small hands moving over the keys with a confidence that seemed beyond his years. Every note, every chord, every pause carried emotion. He learned not just to play the music, but to feel it and make others feel it too. The other students could not hide their curiosity. Some tried to approach him, asking questions about how he had learned to play. He answered politely, sharing bits of his story about listening in the hallways and practicing on a table at home. Some of the wealthier students were surprised that someone without lessons or expensive instruments could reach such a level of skill. They began to respect him, even if some quietly felt ashamed of their earlier words. One day, the principal called the janitor and his son into her office. She smiled warmly, explaining that the school wanted to support his musical journey. They offered him a scholarship to attend special music programs and cover any expenses needed for lessons or instruments. The boy was stunned. He had never imagined such an offer. The janitor held his son's hand, squeezing it gently. Tears filled his eyes, not just from pride, but from knowing how hard life had been for them both and how this recognition could change everything. The boy accepted the offer quietly, his mind already imagining the hours of practice ahead. He realized that talent combined with hard work could open doors that had seemed impossible. The music teacher cheered, promising to guide him every step of the way. Other teachers began to notice his dedication, offering advice, encouragement, and even small mentoring sessions. The boy was no longer invisible. He was part of the school community in a way he had never expected. Yet, despite all the support and admiration, there were still challenges. Some students whispered behind his back, jealous or unsure how to respond to someone so young and gifted. The boy learned to ignore these murmurs, focusing instead on his practice. He remembered the words that had once hurt him. "You are too poor for this school." Those words still echoed occasionally, but now they fueled his determination rather than weakening his spirit. At home, the boy continued his private practice. He had no piano, but he did not need one. He used his imagination, pressing invisible keys on the table, memorizing each note, each rhythm. His father watched proudly, helping only when needed, offering advice, and reminding him to be patient. They both knew that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, persistence, and a love for music were just as important. The school arranged a small concert for the music students, and the boy was invited to perform. This time he played with confidence, eyes open, connecting with the audience. Each note was deliberate, full of emotion, and filled the room with sound that made people pause and listen. Families, teachers, and students were amazed. Some had tears in their eyes. For the boy, it was more than applause. It was recognition of all the quiet hours he had spent listening, imagining, and practicing. The students who had once mocked him approached, some awkwardly, some sincerely. They apologized for their previous words and expressed admiration for his talent. The boy accepted their apologies gracefully, understanding that people often speak before they realize. His response showed humility and strength, teaching them lessons far beyond music. News of his skill spread beyond the school. Local music communities and nearby schools began to take interest. Teachers spoke of him as an example of perseverance and natural talent. The janitor, who had always worked quietly behind the scenes, found himself being noticed as well, not for his job, but for the remarkable guidance and support he had given his son. People admired the quiet strength and patience that had nurtured such talent in difficult circumstances. The boy's life began to balance between school, practice, and dreams. He no longer felt like the boy who stood quietly in the hallways, invisible to everyone. He was a student, a musician, and an inspiration. Yet he remained humble, never forgetting where he came from, the struggles he faced, and the words that had once tried to break him. Even among success, the boy continued to listen, observe, and learn. He knew that each day was a chance to grow. Each note he played carried his story, the hours of quiet practice, the love and support of his father, and the dreams that had never been silenced. He understood that recognition was fleeting, but skill, patience, and passion were lasting. The music room, once a place he could only peek into, had become his second home. Every visit was an opportunity to explore, to improve, and to connect with something greater than himself. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a partner in his journey, a friend that had been waiting for him all along. With each performance, his confidence grew, as did his connection to the school community. The janitor and his son would often sit together after practice, reflecting on the day. The boy would hum the new pieces he learned, while the janitor would listen quietly, offering gentle guidance. They both understood that the journey was long, filled with challenges, but also filled with hope. The bond between father and son deepened, strengthened by shared dreams, struggles, and triumphs. The phrase that had once been an insult now held a different meaning. Too poor for this school was no longer a barrier. It was a memory of a time when the boy's determination had been tested. He had proven that heart, talent, and perseverance could overcome obstacles that money or privilege could not. He knew that life would always have challenges, but he had learned the power of resilience, the importance of passion, and the value of belief in oneself. The boy continued to grow as a musician, as a student, and as a young person learning to navigate a world that sometimes judges too quickly. Each day was a step forward, each note a testament to his journey. The music room became a place of freedom, a space where dreams were realized through patience and hard work. The boy no longer waited in the shadows. He had stepped into the light, carrying with him the lessons of humility, courage, and dedication. The day of the big recital arrived, and the school was buzzing with excitement. Parents, students, and teachers filled the auditorium, the air heavy with anticipation. The boy stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly, his heart beating fast. This was the moment he had dreamed about for so long, the moment that all his listening, memorizing, and silent practice had led to. The janitor, his father, stood quietly behind him, offering a gentle smile, giving silent support without words. The lights dimmed, and the announcer introduced the performers one by one. The boy watched as other students played their pieces, some with skill, others with nerves showing. When it was finally his turn, a hush fell over the audience. The spotlight shone brightly on the piano, and the boy took a deep breath, walking slowly to the bench. He felt the weight of expectation and curiosity from everyone in the room, but he also felt something stronger: his own love for the music. Sitting down, he let his fingers hover over the keys, remembering all the lessons he had absorbed and all the music he had memorized. Then he began to play. The notes flowed smoothly, gracefully, and with emotion that touched the hearts of everyone listening. Each chord told a story. Each melody carried a piece of his journey. The audience was silent, completely captivated by the music, the boy, and the story that had unfolded silently over so many weeks. As he played, the memories of the whispers and laughter from the hallways came to mind. He remembered the words, "You are too poor for this school." But now those words felt powerless. They could not touch him anymore. Every note he played was a testament to his determination, his love for music, and his courage. The boy was no longer the quiet child in the hallways. He had become a voice that could not be ignored. The janitor watched from the back of the room, tears forming in his eyes. He had always known his son was special, but to see him perform like this, in front of everyone, was overwhelming. Pride and joy filled him as he realized that the boy had turned challenges into strength and had created something beautiful from his passion and dedication. The music continued, and the boy lost himself in it. He was no longer thinking about the audience or the recital. He was only thinking about the piano, the notes, and the feeling of creating something that could move people. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, absorbing the beauty and emotion of what they had just heard. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and louder, filling the entire auditorium. The boy stood, bowing slightly, overwhelmed by the reaction. Teachers and students alike were cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The parents clapped and smiled, moved by the young musician who had brought so much emotion to the stage. The janitor stepped forward, hugging his son tightly. In that moment, no one saw him as just the janitor or his son as the poor boy from the hallways. They saw talent, dedication, and the triumph of perseverance. After the recital, the boy was surrounded by students who wanted to talk to him, to know how he had learned to play so beautifully. The ones who had mocked him before now looked at him with respect, some even apologizing for their earlier behavior. The boy smiled and nodded, gracious and humble, understanding that people often speak without understanding, but they could also learn and grow. The teachers spoke to him about future opportunities. Music competitions, advanced lessons, and even potential scholarships were discussed. The boy listened carefully, imagining all the possibilities. He realized that his life had changed, not because of money or privilege, but because of his heart, his love for music, and the patience he had shown in learning quietly and persistently. In the weeks that followed, the boy's reputation as a talented musician spread even further. Local music teachers and community members came to hear him play. The janitor's son, who had once been invisible, became an inspiration to others. He showed that talent and determination could overcome circumstances, and that dreams could be achieved through hard work and belief in oneself. At home, the boy continued to practice, now with proper instruments and guidance, but still with the same passion that had started in the hallways. His father remained his quiet supporter, proud but careful not to overshadow his son's achievements. They would sit together in the evenings, listening to the music, discussing pieces, and reflecting on how far they had come. The boy never forgot the early days when he had to listen quietly from the corners, when he had no piano and only his imagination to guide him. Those moments had shaped him, teaching patience, focus, and the value of silent dedication. They had prepared him for the spotlight, for the recognition, and for the understanding that true talent comes from persistence, not privilege. As the months passed, the boy continued to grow as a musician and as a young person. He played in concerts, participated in competitions, and continued to inspire others with his story. He remained humble, always remembering the challenges he had faced and the support he had received. He understood that recognition was not the end goal. The journey, the love for music, and the lessons learned along the way were what truly mattered. The janitor and his son walked together through the school one day, past the hallways where students once whispered and pointed. Now they walked with confidence, heads held high, not because of the approval of others, but because of the pride in what they had achieved together. The boy had proven that he belonged, not because of money or social status, but because of his heart, his talent, and his unwavering determination. The music room, once a distant dream, had become a place of growth, creativity, and achievement. The piano, once untouchable, had become a partner in the boy's journey, helping him express his story to the world. Every note he played carried the lessons of patience, courage, and perseverance, reaching the hearts of those who listened. The words that had once hurt him, too poor for this school, were now memories of a past that had tested him and made him stronger. He had turned those words into motivation, proving that talent and dedication could open doors that seemed closed. The boy had not only changed his own life but had also changed the way the school saw him, teaching a lesson that true value lies in character, effort, and passion. As he sat at the piano after another successful performance, he smiled quietly, thinking of all the hours he had spent listening, imagining, and practicing. He realized that the journey was ongoing, that there were always new pieces to learn, new challenges to face, and new ways to grow. But he also knew that he had already achieved something extraordinary. He had taken his passion, nurtured it, and shared it with the world, leaving an impression that would last far longer than any single performance. The janitor watched his son from the doorway, pride shining in his eyes. He knew that the boy's story was far from over, but he also knew that no matter what came next, his son had learned the most important lesson, that with patience, hard work, and belief in oneself, no obstacle is too great, and no dream is too distant. Together, they had turned a dream into reality, and the music that had once only lived in the boy's mind now resonated in the hearts of everyone who heard it. A reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places.